Here's a man that instead of bombing the world, a petition would do the job, Anthony. We need more civilized men like you.
Well, good evening, and of course it's bonfire night, so those people who are not enjoying a bonfire, they're welcome to watch the show. And of course, it's quite a tradition, November the 5th, and
Yes.
some of the effigies which have been burnt or will be burnt tonight are quite interesting and quite humorous. The Mayor of London is one of them.
Yes, that's right. Is
Apparently, something
Ulay's one. That's
like
good. Yeah.
meters tall. But we always must, of course, going back in time, it was a big thing to not have Parliament blown up. Because they found a different way now. They've infiltrated and taken over the people who are in Parliament as another way, instead of blowing them up, just control them. So, but anyway, the idea to look after our heritage and our institutions, as long as they're well run, is something worth celebrating.
Yeah, I mean, I think as well, like that's where I am. I am just in such a not a despondent position. Is that I was really brought up with nothing but respect and faith in these institutions. Like I love this country, its parliament, its history, the monarchy, and for me, I think maybe that's why I take it so personally. That to see these institutions so corrupted, to see them become just shadows of themselves in such a short period of time, I think it hits home so hard.
Well, I think some years ago people had said members of our parliament are corrupt. They would have been given short shrift, but now it's becoming more and more apparent that many of them are corrupt. And it's deeply saddening. And the corruption is in many forms, like with the corruption of power, we've had people not acting properly as MPs. And one example, very blatant one, has been Nadine Dorries, who, looking at one of the Sunday papers today, it says that she spent hours interviewing MPs, civil servants, all sorts of other people to put together her new book. Yet this was at a time when she was supposed to be an MP representing her constituents. So it's no wonder when they had that by-election that people were up in arms and didn't vote Conservative, because they felt they'd been very much let down by their MP. But unfortunately, we're getting let down by virtually all of the MPs at the moment on the issue of the, what's actually going on in Israel and Gaza and the West Bank of Palestine at the moment. And it is quite apparent to me that if you look at things in detail and take into account that both sides put out propaganda, that there is a form of genocide going on in the Gaza Strip. Yes. And funny enough, I was, in preparation for this program, I was looking at the Liberal Democrat policy for the situation. And it did actually say that their spokesperson, Lena Moran, is actually from Palestine. She's got Palestine heritage. But the thing is, we as a country, because we had the British mandate there from 1917 to 1948, do have a knowledge of the area and a responsibility for the area, and therefore we should be doing something about it. And I think the problem, when I looked at the Liberal Democrats' statement, it was very wishy-washy, not as bad as the situation with the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, but in the past, you'd have a situation where when we had a strong, respected nation, we would have done something. And one of the
Yeah.
first things to do is, if you're directly or indirectly giving military and financial aid and other forms of political aid to a country like Israel, then you simply say that is going to be stopped immediately.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, Anthony, because it really crystallizes in it, because we heard for years that, well, since February 2020, that the Russians were deliberately targeting and killing civilians. Now, as we pointed out at the time, the Russians obviously were not doing that. They were they were fighting within the rules of war. They were, sadly, in any war there is going to be civilian casualties.
Yeah.
But the Russians were not targeting civilians yet. Ursula von der Leyen, Blinken, Sunak, Johnson, all these people said the Russians were deliberately targeting civilians. Whereas what we've seen in the bombing of Gaza is indiscriminate bombing of civilians and the deliberate targeting of civilians as well. And it's that I think that's the thing that really gets most people, is just the sheer hypocrisy of it. And like, if people, and I keep saying this, if people want to support Israel, if people were disgusted with the events of October the 7th, if people don't like Hamas, fine, that's your opinion. But nothing that happened can ever justify the targeting of children and this slaughter of children that is taking place.
Yes, I mean, you can't in any instance in the world take out if a section of the population have done some damage, terrorism or otherwise, you can't take it out on the whole of their population. And we're talking about 2.1 million people in Palestine, including Christians, although obviously Christians and Muslims and Jews should all be treated equally. But the point is, we're standing by, and we've allowed 3 Christian churches to be bombed.
Yeah.
Virtually no word of protest. What we should be saying is to the Israeli government, you are going to rebuild those.
Yes.
And until you do,
but this is the thing is as well, what they've really shown the Israelis, and I've got into a lot of stick from it, but this is the reality. Judaism is not Christianity. Islam is not Christianity either. The message that Jesus gave was a very different message. Judaism and Islam are 2 desert religions based on an eye for an eye and a tooth for it. I mean, they're very different. They are just different. What the Israelis could have done is they could have said, look, we're going to take out Hamas. We're going to do it clinically. But what we're going to do is we're going to build up the Palestinian community. We're going to support these people. But they didn't do that. And what they're still doing is the settler violence in the West Bank. Like, the settlers are running around with a military escort and just shooting people dead. And it's so out of control. I mean, there's no moral justification whatsoever for how the Israelis are behaving here. And again, a lot of people are pointing that out who are also Jewish and Israelis as well. And I think there has been a real. I actually think the actions right now by Netanyahu in the state of Israel will result in the eventual collapse of the state of Israel quicker than we think, because their behavior here is just off the charts.
Oh yes, and if you look at the extremist minority government currently running the show in Israel, big factions of them are basically descendants of the extremist terrorist groups, which killed 784 British soldiers and policemen, and also loads of civil servants at the bombing of the King David Hotel. And none of that is mentioned in the media. But at the time in the UK, the public were up in arms about it. You had these young national servicemen who basically had no military experience we had 100,000 troops in Palestine, bigger than the army is now. And a lot of them just didn't know how to deal with this sort of terrorism because
they're hung as well, brutal hangings. And as you say, like there is a direct link between the Irgun and Likud. That was the Irgun that founded Likud, and as you say, it's absolutely. I mean, you had Rishi Sunak over at the King David Hotel. That is a humiliation for the. But again, it's that they don't know their history. And Anthony, I think what is really shown is just how controlled our country is by Zionists, and also how controlled the right wing opposition is as well. The behaviour of GB News, Richard Tice, Nigel Farage, all of these people with slavish support for Netanyahu. I think it's even caught me by surprise just how slavish it is.
Yes. And the very, very sad thing about it is, as you rightly said, they put the continuance of the state of Israel at risk, but also they put Israeli people at risk because they're all being associated with this awful tactics of mass bombings and not doing the sensible thing and targeting Hamas themselves. They don't care, it appears, how many civilians
no, they don't.
And of course, we don't know the final figure because they haven't. It's going to take a long time to clear the rubble. But as you know, we're talking about 20,000, huge proportion of children, and it's just unacceptable. I personally think that it's going to see the downfall of Rishi Sunak as leader of the Conservatives and the Prime Minister. I'm convinced there'll be a new Prime Minister before the next election. I also think it's going to see the downfall of Keir Starmer.
Yeah, I hope so.
I was reading one of the Conservative papers today, which was a whole page glorifying Keir Starmer and saying his leadership on this issue was going to be the making of him. But anyone who looks behind the scenes and knows what's going on with the unions and Labour parties and so on will know that Keir Starmer is very, very unpopular, and he's getting close to being as unpopular as the Prime Minister of Israel, who apparently 75% of the people of Israel are against him.
And Anthony, here's the thing is as well, right? You've got Keir Starmer married to an Israeli, okay? Suella Braverman married to a Jewish man whose family fight in the Israeli Defense Force. These are clear vested interests. You've got Hamza Yusuf in Scotland, whose parents are over in the Gaza Strip. You know, the dual, like, I think again a lot of people are now waking up to dual loyalty, and also that this mess that's being created, as Tina points out, which is an excellent point. Labour have a problem. Their donors are overwhelmingly Zionist or Jewish, yet their voting bloc has a significant tranche of Muslims. Like this is the other thing is as well. We do have a sizable Muslim population in this country, yet the government appears to be. I mean, what do you think about Suella Braverman describing these marches as hate marches, Anthony?
Well, once you go down that road, you're going to start calling other marches hate marches. You're going to think of, and of course, it's not just that. They've come up with this new proposal to make it against the law to be seen to acting or saying things in an extremist manner. Now, they're saying that's to do with people like Hamas, but I think
it'll be us. It'll be us. That's who they're going after. They're going after people like us. Like this is what they always do. People are like, yeah, let's get these Hamas extremists dealt with. Oh, you do realize it's going to affect you as well. You're an extremist because you oppose diversity.
I think also in this, very fortunately, there's a lot of Jewish peace groups, not just in Israel, but here in the UK and in New York, there was a big Jewish
Yeah, there
protest
was.
against Biden's policies. So I think, from the Christian point of view, we should be supporting those who strive for peace. And just bear in mind that we've had many years, particularly during the British Mandate, 1917 to 48, where we managed to have a relative harmony between
Yeah.
Christian Jews and Muslims. So we are able to achieve that. And I think what we mustn't forget in all of this is it is our holy land. Jerusalem has
Correct.
a lot of importance to us as Christians, and we're being put down an alley where, oh, you either support the Muslim point of view or you support the Jewish point of view. Well, maybe a lot of Jews and Muslims don't want to have that division. Maybe they'd rather try and work
The
together.
thing is, again, a lot of people like to blame the British for this. Well, the Balfour Declaration specifically said, though, that they believe in the right to a Jewish homeland as long as the rights of the existing people and religious groups there remain respected. And that is obviously just not the case. And like again, I think you can differentiate between Netanyahu and his like ultra extremist Likud Greater Israel project and
Yes,
the average, because again, Netanyahu has faced huge demonstrations. Like this is the thing that really gets me as well, Anthony. Netanyahu proved that he is not an ally of people. He allowed Pfizer to come in
mm,
and jab people. He had some of the most draconian lockdowns. He had the green pass. He was prepared to do anything to stay in power. And likewise, now he's all. I mean, Netanyahu should be in a prison cell, and I think most people in Israel in the West would also agree with that. Like, I don't understand why people are hitching their wagons behind such a corrupt individual.
yes, it's like being pictured or with a criminal, and why people would want that. I just don't know. Except I think that the Prime Minister of Israel and indeed the people who've come over fawning over to him. The latest one is Boris Johnson. Would you believe
Ridiculous.
they all think that they're going to be looked after? And look at how well Boris Johnson's been looked after he made sure that Ukraine didn't have a peace deal with Russia well over a year ago. And I think these people sort of think, well, we're going to, if we play by the rules and do what the globalist elite want, they'll make sure we're sitting comfortably, so to speak. And this is one of the problems we've got with our modern political situation in the UK, in that politicians, when they get to the top of the ladder, their perception is to do what they're told, take what they can, and enrich themselves as much as possible. And they go, but they cause damage, and then somebody else comes along to cause more damage. And somehow we've got to end that cycle, because you go back many years, particularly into the 19th century, when we had politicians of stature who did have a bit of honour about their office. And I'm not saying all MPs have got no honour, but what we need to do is get the MPs with honour and integrity back into being the majority.
Well,
Uh,
and again, I think the fundamental this has really come out now is that this dual loyalty is an issue. I mean, it really is. It is an issue. It's like, for example, and I don't like talking about my personal life too much, but my wife is Polish, right? She's Polish, right? She's not British. She's never going to be British. Like, did you? And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just dealing with reality. She was born and brought up in Poland. She speaks Polish. Now, you could say that we are allies with Poland, that we can work in conjunction with them, etc. But let's just say if Britain ever went to war with Poland, whose side would she take? Would I have to disavow her, Anthony? Would I have to drive her to the camp and lock her in there myself? That's that. Whereas, I mean, that's on a sort of a more local level. But when you think about it at a national level, people with dual loyalty to Israel, people with dual loyalty to Muslim countries as well, and these are people in significant positions of power
Well,
as well, and also sending our weapons, sending our troops, intelligence as well.
yes, I mean that's unacceptable, and there's an argument that we should have a new constitution, and certainly one of the uh, definite standards of being an MP and a minister that you have one sole loyalty, and that's to the United Kingdom and the British people. Yet it seems acceptable to say otherwise, which is wrong. And we've got this in the United States as well, where Anthony Blinken has said exactly the same thing. That he,
Erdogan and Al Sisi of Egypt pulled him up over that. Al Sisi actually said to Blinken, "Look, you went there and said you don't stand here just as the U.S. Secretary of State. You said you're here as a Jew as well." He said, "How can you do that?" I mean, the thing is that's just so unprofessional as well. I mean, a lot of people are looking at this like. I listened to the speech of Nasrallah, of Hezbollah, and you know what? He actually came across as more magnanimous and statesmanlike than bloody Blinken does. I mean, our leaders are completely hysterical now. Whereas when you even like when you listen to Putin or Kim Jong Un or etc., these are the people that we're told are lunatics. They're unhinged. No, they're not. It is the West and Western governments that are completely unhinged.
And also, David, I think it's actually quite misleading because what it does, it contributes to this division argument because it's sort of saying there's Jews on one side and Muslims on another side. Anthony Blinken, a Jew. What would be more accurate would be for him to say, I'm a Jew who believes in Zionism. And that's and of course Zionists.
But again that's what they've done, which is very, very sneaky. Is that and a lot of people again they have made it that all criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic, when actually some of the biggest critics of the state of Israel are themselves Jews. Like Zionism was a segment within wider Judaism. Like there is. I mean, most are Zionist Jews. That's the reality, but a lot aren't. And what they've done is that they've said it in. It's like again, the thing about like dual loyalties. I mean, I was actually thinking about this. It is a really tough one because obviously you do have people, but I actually think that if you look at any other countries, like you take a country like Qatar, for example. Now, I think 70% of people that live in Qatar are foreign. They are they're foreign workers, but they don't get to vote. They don't get to take part in government. They're not involved. So they are regarded as guest workers.
Yeah.
Now, if we were to do that here, we would be called like Nazis. That's what they would say. Whereas that's actually the case in most of these countries, that they well, this is our country. These are our people that have been here for hundreds of years. And it really is in the West that we have this complete. It's a mess. The whole thing's a mess, Anthony.
Oh, it definitely is. I was thinking back to when General Allenby liberated Jerusalem from the Ottomans in 1917, the Jewish population in Palestine was only 8%. And Christians were much more. But I doubt if the Jews in Palestine were that bothered about creating a
homeland.
Jewish state.
Yes.
And
many of them. I mean, many of them weren't, and they actually point that out, that it was a result of migration after the Second World War. But it's like, the thing is, like, about Jew loyalties. I'm just saying that I think if you are to be in a position of power in this country, if you are to be in that, I think you should only have a passport. And being blunt, you should have parents and grandparents that were born in this country, or at least one, because it's crazy. Because, and then again, this isn't just on the Jewish side of it. You've got, as I pointed out earlier, you've got Sadiq Khan in London, you've got Hamza Yusuf in Scotland as well. Many people are saying he's taking the pro-Palestinian line, and his parents are over there in Gaza, and it's not bad. And we're getting involved in all these foreign wars, Anthony, and it's the money, that's the money printing, and there's a lot of people making a lot of money out of this. Can I just say thanks to Mathis Wiz on Rumble, and also Sporty Oxford as well. I mean, I just think there must come a point where we draw a line in the sand and say, look, right, let's put a complete halt to migration. Let's stop getting involved in foreign wars. That's not overly. I would say that's a position the vast majority of people in this country would agree with.
Well, would you believe, David, going back to 1945 to 1948 in Palestine, there are a number of instances where the British government said, we're going to ignore what the international regulations are, what the UN says, the League of Nations, and there were good reasons for that. Yet, for some reason, our government does not take that view. It doesn't put the interests of the nation first. So when we have these boats coming across the channel, they escort them over instead of escorting them back.
Yeah,
this is one of the big problems we've got with the nation at the moment. But you were mentioning the Balfour Declaration. Of course, there was the 1939 Act, which sort of particularly clarified that and upset a lot of the Jewish Zionists, because they were saying that it was a departure from the Balfour Declaration, because what Britain was basically saying is, yes, we are going to give a homeland for Jewish people in the Holy Land, but that doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be a separate state. And it goes back to what you said about not upsetting the other people in the region. But of course, what happened, and we've got an anniversary tomorrow, November the 6th, in 1944, 79 years ago, Lord Moyne, who is the Middle East resident minister in Cairo, was brutally murdered by extremist Jewish terrorists. Now, that was in 1944, when we were fighting the Second World War. And we had a very interesting situation. And this is, to be fair to all people, there was a Jewish brigade from Palestine, which fought very well for the UK in the Second World War. There also were Muslims who fought for Britain. But we had a very complicated situation in Palestine, where you had, as you know, various sort of terrorist groups, but there was also a sort of one which was considered more moderate. And at one time, the more moderate one was informing on the more extreme ones.
Yeah,
it was a very complicated situation. But basically, the problem was that the people coming in were determined to have this state of Israel, whereas the people there already, were quite happy living with Christians
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
Muslims.
yeah. No,
Uh,
and the thing is as well, Anthony, what really does come across, and I keep pointing this out, this whole thing is so complicated.
yes.
And my analysis is we in the UK are heading for a Lebanon style
Mm,
situation. And if you look at the civil war in Lebanon, it was just a disaster. You had Maronite Christian, you had Druze Arabs, you
mm.
had Palestinian refugees, you had Shia Muslims, you had Sunni Muslims, you had Israel went in, and then everybody just starts fighting. And then one minute you're friends with this guy, and then you fall out, and then you're friends. And that's what we're heading for. And there is the we'll try and get around to sort of concluding on this, Anthony, the overall agenda that the powers that be are quite happy for this situation. Because right now everyone's getting angry about, people flying flags in London. Whereas, nobody's attacking, nobody's going after Tony Blair for his lies and his wars. Nobody's going after Boris Johnson. They must just be looking at this thinking, this is brilliant. No one's attacking me just now.
Yes, that's very true. And of course, I originally thought that having these peace protests on Saturday, November the 11th, Remembrance Day, was a bad idea. But then you could also argue that it's a day to argue for peace. And I think the people who sort of criticise these protests have been proved in the wrong, because if you look at any marches past the cenotaph, clearly the protesters, which are a mixture of backgrounds of people in the United Kingdom, are not trying to attack.
No, but people like Douglas Murray. Douglas Murray tweeted out that there was a plan to destroy the cenotaph and desecrate it. That's just not true. The plan is not to march past. Now there is an argument. Some people take offence that on Armistice Day that these people are having a demonstration. But again, fundamentally, if you live in a democracy, people have a right. Now, what they said was they want to have a march, but they're not going to go past the cenotaph. They're not going to go through Whitehall. I don't really see the issue with that. Whereas people like Douglas Murray, etc., are deliberately winding people up because they want to see violence and they want to see it kicking off.
Yes, it's deliberately inflammatory, which is absolutely appalling, because there are things which should rile up the people of this country, and we've discussed many of them on previous programs. But to deliberately cause antagonism when there isn't any, just to suit your own particular cause, I think is actually quite immoral. It's certainly not a Christian attitude at all. And, it's as simple as that. But the thing is, of course, there's also the Lord Mayor's parade on Saturday the 11th. So anyone who's organised a protest in London will know that you generally are made aware of other protests going on, and you'd be an absolute idiot to try and move in on their protest. You obviously have to have some form of agreement to stay away from other protests, because otherwise you'll mess your own protests up. So unless the police are completely unreasonable, then it's sensible, as you said, that these protests are not going to go near the cenotaph.
Yeah.
But I personally wouldn't be surprised if there's some agents provocateurs who, maybe just a small group, but they'll get them to try and attack the cenotaph, and they'll blame all the many thousands of people who went on the peace marches. They will be all their faults.
Yeah. I mean that's it. But look, let's just. I think it's important that people just we don't get, because again people are getting whipped up, and what the Zionist propaganda machine has done very, very successfully is they have whipped up people in the West's anger about mass immigration to suit their agenda. And it's thing is, I'm not the only one that's saying this. A lot of people recognize it. They see it that people are now given permission to talk about multiculturalism failing, about Islam, but they're just being allowed to do it because it's in the interest. That'll soon be shut down very,
Oh,
very soon.
yeah, definitely, David.
And Anthony, what do you think? And Tina points that out, and it's very true. The risk of a false flag event or some sort of terrorist attack. I mean, you can imagine that's probably high up on the agenda.
Well, these people are very experienced at doing these sort of things, particularly in places like Syria, where these things have gone on. They've done them in respect to the Maidan Revolution in Ukraine. They basically done them all over the world, and it's mainly American government motivated, but sometimes it has been the UK government as well. And we've got to move away from those sorts of awful, secretive and alarming sort of tactics to cause chaos in certain parts of the world to bring about a political solution which you yourself want. So, yes, I think there are things going on, and we've got to be on our guard for things happening in the UK. And I personally would think it's absolutely awful that people like the security services, if they stand by and allow people to be harmed just so it suits a political agenda.
That's what they do. That's what they've done, and that's what they do. You know, it was the 9/11 was allowed to happen. The Manchester bombing. You know, he was picked up in a Royal Navy boat and brought here. You know, and they knew what was going on.
We've seen it in Gaza as well, haven't we? Because the Israeli Prime Minister has been criticised for ignoring the intelligence,
yeah.
And it's almost like it suited him to have this.
Of course, it did.
Terrorist incursion, and we've got to call these things out. And one of the things which irritates me about some of the people we've been talking about who are supposedly in favour of freedom is they never want to debate the issue because they know if they debate it, they're going to lose hands down.
Correct.
Because they don't actually give the full facts, do they?
No, I have said this. I would debate or talk with anybody about what's going on because this whole thing just doesn't add up. This whole situation, scrutinized, doesn't add up. Just like the Iraq war didn't add up, just like 9/11 didn't add up, just like the COVID scam didn't add up, just like Ukraine doesn't add up, just like climate change doesn't add up. And as you say, like these people who are just taking this totally blinkered perspective and not even daring to think this might not be. It's incredible. Anthony, thanks so much for coming on. You were on RT Crosstalk recently, weren't you?
Yes, that was a couple of days ago, and that touched on some of the issues we've mentioned tonight. But of course,
I'll put your link in. I mean, this is the thing. Do you know if I've been watching the news? Do you know where I've actually been watching? I've been watching Al Jazeera. Because I mean, I know it is obviously biased in sympathy of the Palestinians, but it's far better than the BBC, Sky, or ITV. And again, during the start of the Ukraine war, RT was far better at covering it. Yeah, of course, you knew there's a bit of a bias, but they kind of admitted it, and that's once again shown that see if you actually watch Al Jazeera, the quality of journalism is so much better, and it's so much more thorough, and it really does show up how bad the UK MSM is when you
Well,
actually watch these channels.
well, if you look at it, David, they have reporters on the ground in Gaza. You don't see that with GB News, Sky, BBC. They're all reporting from Jerusalem or Haifa or wherever. But you know, what use is that? But yes, it is a little bit biased, but you do
Yeah.
get more news.
But you recognize it. You recognize it. But at least you can think, well,
You get
it's
more old news as well, David.
it's more honest. Anthony, brilliant stuff. Everybody go over and follow Anthony on Twitter. He does some great work. His crosstalk stuff is there as well. And a
And
voice of
one of the things
sanity.
to remember, David, we've been discussing things tonight, and everyone question everything that they see on the mainstream media. If you're happy with the answers after you've done the questioning, that's fine. But question everything.
That's all we can do. And question us as well. We're more than happy to
Yes.
like that. That's the thing as well. I'm happy to be questioned. Whereas when you immediately go in, you're not allowed to talk about that. Well, that's when the spider sense should prick up in the back of your ear. That if you're not allowed to discuss it, there's obviously something being hidden. Anthony, thanks so much again. Really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you, and happy November the 5th to everyone. And thank you, David. All the
Thanks,
best.
Anthony. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.